My name is Mabel Walker. I'm 62 years old and recently retired after 35 years as an elementary school teacher. I never expected my son Thomas would see me as a burden at this stage of my life. The words still sting. I don't want to feed an extra mouth. Instead, he found me a job at his company. I smiled and agreed, swallowing my hurt. What I couldn't have predicted was what happened when his boss saw me on my first day. That moment changed everything in ways none of us could have imagined. If you're watching this, I'd love to know where you're viewing from. Go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to follow my journey. Trust me, this story about how life can take unexpected turns when family dynamics and workplace politics collide is one you won't want to miss. Teaching was never just a job for me. It was my calling. For 35 years, I shaped young minds in the third-grade classroom of Oakwood Elementary. I still remember my first class in 1986, 28 bright-eyed 8-year-olds with gap-toothed smiles and endless curiosity. Every September brought new faces, new challenges, and new opportunities to make a difference. My classroom walls were always covered with colorful student artwork, educational posters, and inspirational quotes. In this room, we are all learners. Read my favorite sign above the chalkboard. I believe that with my whole heart. Even after 3 decades, each child taught me something new about patience, creativity, or looking at the world from a fresh perspective. My husband James and I met in college. He was studying engineering, and I was pursuing education. We married the summer after graduation and settled in Bedford, a mid-sized town with good schools and affordable housing. James worked for a local manufacturing company designing industrial equipment. His salary was modest but steady, and combined with my teaching income, we lived comfortably in our small 3-bedroom ranch house. Thomas came along 3 years into our marriage. From the beginning, he was intense and driven. While other toddlers were content with simple toys, Thomas would spend hours organizing his blocks by color and size. In elementary school, he insisted on getting perfect scores on every test. James and I sometimes worried about his perfectionism, but we were also proud of his determination. Our family life wasn't extravagant, but it was happy. Weekends were spent on home improvement projects, camping trips, or cheering at Thomas's soccer games. We had family dinner together almost every night where we'd share stories about our days and discuss current events. James was especially adamant about teaching Thomas the value of hard work, honesty, and treating people with respect. Success isn't just about what you accomplish, James would tell him. It's about how you accomplish it and who you bring along with you. Everything changed when Thomas was 25, and James suffered a massive heart attack. One moment, we were planning a weekend trip to visit Thomas in the city. The next, I was a widow at 52. The doctor said it was likely hereditary. James's father had died young from heart problems as well. James had a modest life insurance policy, but medical bills quickly ate into those funds. I made the difficult decision to sell our house and move into a small 2-bedroom apartment closer to my school. The money from the house sale went into a college fund for Thomas, who was halfway through his MBA at the time. "Mom, you don't have to do this," Thomas protested when I told him about selling the house. "I can take out more student loans." "Your father wanted you to graduate without crushing debt," I insisted. "This is what he would have wanted." Looking back, I wonder if that decision marked a turning point in our relationship. By sacrificing my financial security for Thomas's education, did I unwittingly set a precedent that my needs were secondary to his success? At the time, it seemed like the right thing to do. James and I had always prioritized Thomas's future, and I wanted to honor that commitment. Thomas graduated with honors and landed a job at Rapid Tech Solutions, a growing software company in the city. Over the next decade, he climbed the corporate ladder, eventually becoming a middle manager with a team of developers under his supervision. With each promotion came a shift in his demeanor. The humble, grateful son gradually transformed into someone more conscious of status and appearances. 4 years ago, Thomas married Natalie, a marketing executive from a wealthy family. Their wedding was lavish, a far cry from the modest ceremony James and I had in my parents' backyard. Natalie was always polite to me, but there was a coolness to her interactions that made me feel like an outsider. She came from a world of country club memberships and summer homes, and I was acutely aware that my teacher's wardrobe and practical sensibilities didn't fit her aesthetic. "Your mom is quaint," I overheard her telling Thomas at their engagement party. The words stung more than she could know. My apartment had become my sanctuary over the years. Though small, it was filled with mementos from my teaching career and my life with James. Student drawings framed alongside family photos. The bookshelf James built me as a 5th anniversary present. The collection of children's literature I'd accumulated over decades. Each item told a story, held a memory. But as retirement loomed, so did financial reality. My landlord had already informed me that rent would increase significantly when my current lease ended. On a teacher's pension, I simply couldn't afford to stay. Thomas and Natalie had purchased a 4-bedroom house in an upscale suburb the previous year. They had no children yet, though Natalie often mentioned their plans to start a family once the timing was right for her career. One of their spare bedrooms was set up as a home office, while the other remained largely empty, except for a few pieces of expensive exercise equipment that appeared unused. I never explicitly asked to move in with them, but I'd dropped hints about my housing concerns during our monthly phone calls. Thomas always changed the subject quickly or made vague comments about figuring something out. The arthritis in my knees had been worsening over the past few years, making it increasingly difficult to stand for long periods in the classroom. My doctor had suggested a less physically demanding job, but teaching was all I knew. Still, when the principal offered an early retirement package to senior faculty, I reluctantly decided it was time to consider my options. I'd given my heart and soul to Oakwood Elementary for 35 years. Walking out of my classroom on that final day felt like leaving a piece of myself behind. The staff threw a lovely retirement party, and many former students sent cards and messages. Their words of appreciation brought both joy and tears. "You changed my life, Mrs. Walker," wrote one former student, now a teacher herself. "I try to bring the same patience and creativity to my classroom that you showed us every day." As I packed up decades of teaching materials and memories, I wondered what the next chapter of my life would hold. With my limited savings and modest pension, the future looked uncertain at best. The decision to retire wasn't easy, but my body was sending clear signals that it was time. The arthritis in my knees had progressed from occasional discomfort to daily pain. Standing in front of a classroom for hours, kneeling beside desks to help students, and navigating the playground during recess duty had become increasingly difficult. Dr. Levin didn't mince words during my annual physical. "Mabel, if you continue at this pace, you'll need knee replacement surgery within 2 years, she warned, reviewing my x-rays. "The cartilage is wearing thin, and the inflammation is becoming chronic." I'd tried everything: compression sleeves, anti-inflammatory medications, even a series of cortisone injections that provided only temporary relief. Still, I resisted the inevitable until Principal Martinez called me into her office after noticing me wincing as I supervised the lunch line. "Mabel, you've given this school 35 incredible years," Elena said gently. "The district is offering early retirement packages this year with enhanced benefits. Have you considered it might be time?" The compassion in her eyes made it hard to maintain my composure. "This school is my home, Elena. These children are my purpose. What would I do without them?" She reached across her desk and squeezed my hand. "You'll always be part of the Oakwood family. But maybe it's time to find new ways to contribute that don't take such a physical toll." After much soul-searching, I submitted my retirement paperwork. The financial counselor from the district was optimistic but realistic about my situation. "Your pension is decent for someone with your years of service," Mr. Hopkins explained. "But with rising housing costs and inflation, you'll need to budget carefully. Have you considered your living arrangements post-retirement?" That question kept me awake at night. My apartment lease would end 3 months after my retirement date, and the new rent would be nearly 40% higher, completely unsustainable on my fixed income. I decided to broach the subject with Thomas during a dinner I was invited to at their home the following week. I'd prepared Thomas's favorite pot roast, bringing it to their house despite Natalie's hints that they preferred the keto diet these days. Old habits die hard, and cooking for my son still brought me joy. Their house was immaculate as always, more like a furniture showroom than a lived-in home. The kitchen featured gleaming stainless steel appliances that looked barely used, and the living room was decorated in what Natalie called modern minimalism, which meant expensive furniture in neutral tones with very few personal touches. "Everything looks lovely," I commented, placing my well-worn casserole dish on their pristine quartz countertop. I noticed Natalie wince slightly at the contrast. Dinner conversations centered around Thomas's recent project at work and Natalie's promotion in her marketing firm. I listened attentively, asking questions and expressing pride in their accomplishments. When there was finally a lull, I took a deep breath and shared my news. "I've decided to retire at the end of this semester," I announced. "My knees just aren't cooperating anymore, and the district is offering a good early retirement package." Thomas looked up from his phone, which he'd been checking intermittently throughout dinner. "Retire? But you always said you'd teach until they dragged you out of the classroom." "Bodies age even when our spirits don't want them to," I said with a small laugh. 35 years on my feet has taken its toll." Natalie nodded sympathetically. "My mother swears by her personal trainer for joint issues. Perhaps you should look into that, Mabel." I smiled politely, not mentioning that personal trainers weren't exactly in my budget. "Perhaps someday. Right now, I'm more concerned about housing. My lease ends 3 months after retirement, and the new rent will be well beyond what my pension can cover." There was an awkward silence. Thomas and Natalie exchanged glances. "What are you planning to do?" Thomas finally asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Well, that's what I wanted to discuss with you both," I replied, heart-pounding. "I've been looking at senior apartments, but the waiting lists are years long, and other rentals in my price range would take me far from Bedford, away from my friends and community." Another loaded glance passed between them. Natalie suddenly became very interested in rearranging her silverware. "Mom," Thomas said slowly, "what exactly are you suggesting?" I hadn't planned to be so direct, but the moment demanded honesty. "I was wondering if I might stay with you temporarily, just until I can find an affordable place or get on a waiting list for senior housing. I wouldn't be in the way, and I could help around the house, maybe cook some meals." The silence that followed felt eternal. Thomas's expression shifted from surprise to something harder, more closed off. "We've just redone the guest room as a home gym," Natalie interjected quickly. "And the other spare room is Thomas's office. He often works from home now." "I understand," I said, feeling my face grow hot with embarrassment. "It was just a thought. I'll figure something else out." Thomas set down his fork with deliberate precision. "Mom, we're at a critical point in our careers. Natalie's up for director next year, and I'm positioning myself for senior management. We often entertain colleagues and work late hours. Our lifestyle just isn't compatible with having someone else in the house." I nodded, trying to mask my hurt. "Of course, I completely understand. Besides," he continued, his voice taking on an edge I'd never heard before, "I don't want to feed an extra mouth at this stage of our lives. We're trying to save for our own future, for starting a family eventually. It's not personal, it's practical." An extra mouth. The phrase echoed in my head like a physical blow. After everything I'd sacrificed for him, after the years of putting his needs first, I'd been reduced to an extra mouth, a burden to be avoided. Natalie, looking uncomfortable, quickly changed the subject to their upcoming vacation to Bali. I barely registered the details, nodding and smiling automatically, while inside, my heart was cracking. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, and I left as soon as politely possible, declining their offer to call me a rideshare. "I prefer the bus," I said, gathering my empty casserole dish. "It gives me time to think." The night air was cool as I waited at the bus stop, allowing the tears I'd held back to finally fall. I thought about James and wondered what he would say if he could see how our son had turned out. The boy we'd raised to be compassionate and family-oriented had become a man who saw his mother as a financial liability. On the bus ride home, surrounded by late-night commuters, I tried to formulate a plan. My savings would cover maybe 6 months of increased rent before they were depleted. I could look for part-time work, but what skills did I have outside of teaching? At 62, with arthritic knees and no experience in other fields, what employer would want me? The bus lurched to a stop at my corner, jolting me from my thoughts. As I made my way up the stairs to my apartment, each step painful in more ways than one, I resolved not to burden Thomas with my problems again. Somehow, I would figure this out on my own. A week passed with no word from Thomas. I threw myself into cleaning out my classroom, distributing decades of accumulated teaching materials to younger colleagues. Each day, I scoured rental listings and job postings, becoming increasingly discouraged by the options, or lack thereof. Then, on a rainy Sunday afternoon, Thomas appeared at my door unannounced. "Mom," he said, not quite meeting my eyes, "I think I've found a solution to your situation." Thomas stood awkwardly in my small living room, declining my offer of tea or coffee. He remained standing, as if planning a quick exit, while I lowered myself onto my worn but comfortable sofa. "I've been thinking about your retirement situation," he began, his tone businesslike. "And I've spoken with my boss about potential opportunities at Rapid Tech." I raised my eyebrows in surprise. "At your tech company, Thomas, I barely know how to attach a file to an email. What could I possibly do there?" He waved away my concerns. "It's not a technical position. We need a receptionist at the front desk. It's perfect for someone like you. Greeting visitors, answering phones, basic administrative tasks. Nothing too challenging." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. "Someone like me," I repeated. "You know, someone with people skills but without technical expertise. Someone older who can project a professional image without needing to understand the complex work we do." He delivered this assessment as if it were a compliment. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that beggars can't be choosers. "I see. And this would be full-time, yes, standard hours Monday through Friday. The pay isn't great, but combined with your pension, it should be enough for you to afford your apartment." He finally sat down, pulling out his phone to check messages. "My boss is doing me a huge favor here, Mom. These positions usually go to college graduates looking to get their foot in the door. I had to really sell him on the idea of hiring someone more mature." More mature. A euphemism, if I ever heard one. "What exactly did you tell your boss about me?" I asked, suddenly concerned about how I'd been presented. Thomas looked up from his phone. "Just that you're reliable, good with people, and in need of post-retirement income. That you raised me as a single mom after Dad died, so you know about responsibility and hard work." He hesitated. "I may have emphasized that you'd be grateful for the opportunity and wouldn't expect advancement or special treatment. The implication was clear. I should be thankful for any job regardless of how menial and not aspire to more. At 62, my only value was in being a warm body at a reception desk, a charity case employed as a favor to my son. "When would they want me to start?" I asked, swallowing my pride. Thomas looked relieved. "There's an interview on Wednesday, but it's just a formality. The job's yours if you want it. You could start next Monday." He stood again, checking his watch. "We'll need to get you some appropriate clothes. Business attire, nothing too—" He gestured vaguely at my floral blouse and comfortable slacks. "Nothing too what, Thomas?" I pressed, a rare edge creeping into my voice. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Nothing too casual or dated. Rapid Tech has a certain image to maintain. Modern professional. I can take you shopping tomorrow after work." The thought of my son selecting appropriate clothing for me as if I were a child incapable of dressing myself was almost too much to bear. But again, necessity overruled pride. Fine, I agreed. What time should I be ready? As Thomas outlined the plans for tomorrow's shopping trip and Wednesday's interview, I found myself wondering how we'd arrived at this point. When had my accomplished, confident son developed such a dismissive view of his own mother? When had I become someone whose value could be reduced to not an extra mouth to feed if I contributed economically? After Thomas left, I sat for a long time looking at the family photos on my wall. James's smiling face seemed to watch me from a decades-old camping trip picture his arm around a teenage Thomas who still looked at me with admiration rather than impatience. "What would you do, James?" I whispered to the empty room. But I knew the answer. James had always counseled practicality in difficult times. "Sometimes you have to bend with the wind to avoid breaking," he'd say whenever we faced challenges. So I would bend. I would take this job, wear whatever clothes Thomas deemed appropriate, and be grateful for the chance to maintain my independence, even if it came at the cost of my dignity. For now, at least. The shopping trip the next day was as uncomfortable as I'd anticipated. Thomas efficiently guided me through an upscale department store, selecting tailored pants, blazers, and blouses in subdued colors. Each time I reached for something with color or personality, a turquoise scarf, a blouse with a subtle floral pattern, he shook his head. "We're going for professional mom, neutral and classic." By the time we reached the checkout, I barely recognized the woman who would wear these clothes. The price tags made me wince, but Thomas insisted on paying, reinforcing the unspoken dynamic that I was now a charity project. "Consider it an investment in your new career," he said, handing over his credit card. The sales associate smiled sympathetically at me, perhaps recognizing the discomfort in my expression. As we left the store, Thomas gave me a brief overview of Rapid Tech Solutions. Founded 15 years ago, the company had grown from a small startup to a significant player in enterprise software. Their modern office occupied 3 floors of a downtown high-rise housing over 200 employees across development, sales, marketing, and support teams. "You'll be stationed at the main reception desk on the 20th floor," Thomas explained. "My department is on 22, so we won't be running into each other much during the workday. That's probably best for both of us, professionally speaking." The message was clear at work. Thomas preferred to maintain distance from his receptionist mother. I wondered if his colleagues even knew he'd arranged for my employment, or if he'd presented it as a coincidence. The interview on Wednesday was brief and perfunctory. Barbara Wells, the HR director, was perhaps 10 years younger than Thomas, and regarded me with polite detachment as she explained the position's responsibilities. "The role is fairly straightforward, Mrs. Walker. Greeting visitors, managing the phone system, handling courier deliveries, and basic administrative tasks. Our previous receptionist left rather suddenly, so we're eager to fill the position quickly." Her tone suggested that my hiring was a foregone conclusion, confirming my suspicion that this was indeed a favor to Thomas rather than a merit-based selection. "May I ask about your experience with office technology?" she inquired, glancing at my resume, which highlighted 35 years of teaching, but little else. "I'm familiar with basic computer operations," I said carefully. "Email, word processing, internet searching. I've used the school's digital attendance and grading systems for the past decade." Barbara nodded, making a note. "We use a VoIP phone system and a digital visitor management platform. There will be some training, of course, but we do expect quick adaptation to our systems." The rest of the interview consisted of Barbara outlining company policies, benefits minimal for my part-time status and expectations. She never asked about my teaching career or what skills I might bring from that experience. In her eyes, perhaps in everyone's eyes at Rapid Tech, I was simply an aging woman being given a chance out of charity, expected to be grateful and undemanding. As I left the building, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass doors. An unfamiliar woman in a navy blazer and sensible pumps, hair neatly styled, expression uncertain. I straightened my shoulders and lifted my chin, an old habit from my first day of teaching decades ago. "You can do this, Mabel," I whispered to myself. It's just another classroom in a way. Different students, different lessons, but you'll adapt. You always have. The weekend before my first day, I practiced with the new technology Thomas had insisted I familiarize myself with. He'd given me detailed notes on proper phone etiquette, email protocols, and even suggested I watch tutorials on professional office behavior, as if my years as an educator had taught me nothing about appropriate conduct. Each patronizing suggestion chipped away at my confidence, but I reminded myself of the alternative: financial insecurity, possible homelessness, true dependence. At least this way, I would earn my keep. I wouldn't be an extra mouth to feed. Monday morning arrived with gray skies and a persistent drizzle that matched my mood. I dressed carefully in my new appropriate clothes, applied subtle makeup, and caught the early bus downtown. By 7:45 a.m., I stood before the gleaming glass tower that housed Rapid Tech Solutions, taking deep breaths to calm my nerves. First day jitters are normal at any age, I reminded myself, thinking of all the first days I'd guided nervous children through over the decades. This is just another first day. The elevator whisked me to the 20th floor, where Barbara from HR waited to show me to the reception desk. A sleek, minimalist counter facing the glass doors with the company's blue and silver logo mounted on the wall behind it. "Janice will train you this morning," Barbara explained, gesturing to a young woman in her 20s who offered a perfunctory smile. "She's from our admin pool but covered reception last week after Melissa left. The phones usually start ringing around 8:30 and executives begin arriving by 9. Janice's training consisted of a hurried overview of systems she clearly found intuitive, but which seemed needlessly complex to me. The phone system had multiple lines, call forwarding options, and a digital directory I was expected to memorize. The visitor check-in required inputting data into a tablet, printing security badges, and notifying employees of their guests' arrival through an app. "It's super easy," Janice assured me repeatedly, demonstrating each process at a speed that left me struggling to follow. "Just don't mess up the executive notifications. They hate that." By the time she left me alone at the desk, my confidence had plummeted. I reviewed my hastily scribbled notes, trying to commit the most critical procedures to memory. The lobby remained quiet for about 15 minutes, giving me time to orient myself. Then the elevator doors opened, and my first test arrived, in the form of 3 young men in casual business attire, engrossed in a technical conversation. "Good morning," I greeted them with the warm smile that had welcomed countless children to my classroom. "Welcome to Rapid Tech Solutions." They barely glanced my way, nodding absently as they swiped security cards and continued past the desk. I heard one mutter to another, "New receptionist, older than the last one." More employees began arriving, most paying little attention to the new face at the front desk. Some offered polite nods or brief "good mornings," while others were too absorbed in their phones to acknowledge my presence at all. The phone rang for the first time at 8:27. Taking a deep breath, I answered with the script I'd been given: "Rapid Tech Solutions, how may I direct your call?" The first few calls were manageable, straightforward requests to connect to specific employees. I navigated the transfer system successfully, feeling a small boost of confidence with each completed task. Then came a more complex situation: an angry client demanding to speak to someone in charge immediately about a system failure. The protocol sheet indicated such calls should go to customer support, but the caller refused that option vehemently. "I've already been through 3 levels of support," he fumed. "I need to speak to a director, now." Nothing in my hasty training had prepared me for this. I placed the caller on hold, feeling panic rise as I scanned my notes for guidance. A line of employees had formed at my desk, waiting for me to process a courier delivery that had just arrived. The second phone line began ringing. "Need some help?" A kind voice broke through my mounting anxiety. I looked up to see a middle-aged woman with curly red hair and a sympathetic expression. "First day?" she asked, reaching over to put the second line on hold. "I'm Susan from marketing. Let me show you how we handle these situations." With Susan's help, I navigated the crisis, directing the angry caller to the appropriate manager and processing the courier packages. She stayed beside me for 15 minutes, offering gentle guidance without condescension. "Everyone's first day is overwhelming," she assured me. "The last receptionist was half your age and spent her first morning in tears. You're doing fine." Her kindness was a lifeline in a morning of confusion and subtle ageism. As Susan returned to her department, I felt marginally more prepared to face the day ahead. The morning continued in a blur of calls, deliveries, and visitors, each interaction a small test of my adaptability. I caught glimpses of Thomas twice, both times when he passed through the lobby with colleagues. He acknowledged me with the briefest of nods, his expression neutral, clearly maintaining professional distance from his mother, the receptionist. By lunchtime, my back ached from the unfamiliar office chair, and my mind swam with new information. The small break room off the lobby became my refuge for 30 minutes. I ate my packed lunch alone, using the time to review procedures and prepare for the afternoon. The second half of the day brought new challenges. A complex scheduling system for conference rooms, a video conferencing setup I was expected to manage, and the constant stream of employees who seemed increasingly impatient with my learning curve. "The last receptionist could set this up in seconds," commented one young man, sighing dramatically as I fumbled with the video conference controls. By 5 o'clock, when Barbara returned to check on my progress, I was physically and emotionally exhausted, but determined not to show it. "How was your first day, Mabel?" she asked, her tone suggesting she expected complaints. "Informative," I replied diplomatically. "There's quite a lot to learn, but I'm catching on." Barbara nodded, seemingly satisfied with my response. "It gets easier. By next week, most of this will be second nature." As employees filed out for the day, I gathered my belongings and prepared to leave. The new shoes Thomas had insisted on had left blisters on my heels, and my shoulders ached from tension. Yet I felt a small sense of accomplishment at having survived. The last person I expected to see that day was Thomas, but there he was, approaching the desk as I was logging out of the computer system. "How was it?" he asked, keeping his voice low, though the lobby was nearly empty. "Challenging," I admitted, "but I managed." He nodded, glancing around to ensure no colleagues were within earshot. "A few people mentioned the new receptionist. No major complaints, so that's good." He delivered this assessment as if it were high praise. "Thank you for your concern," I replied, unable to keep a hint of sarcasm from my tone. "I believe I'll improve with practice." Thomas checked his watch. "I have a dinner meeting with clients. Will you be all right getting home?" "I've been navigating public transportation since before you were born," I reminded him gently. "I think I can manage a bus ride." He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Right. Well, I'll check in tomorrow. Try to review those phone protocols tonight. Barbara mentioned you seemed a bit slow with transfers." With that parting advice, he was gone, leaving me to wonder if all sons eventually came to see their mothers as slightly incompetent burdens, or if Thomas was a special case. The rest of the week followed a similar pattern. Each day brought marginally less confusion as I slowly mastered the various systems. Susan from marketing continued to be my unofficial mentor, stopping by the desk to offer encouragement and the occasional tip. "You're doing great," she assured me on Thursday. "Much better than most new people. Just ignore the tech bros who act impatient. Half of them couldn't find their way out of a paper bag without an app." Her humor and kindness were bright spots in otherwise challenging days. I hadn't made friends exactly, but at least I'd found an ally. By Friday, I felt cautiously optimistic that I might actually succeed in this unexpected late career pivot. Then came the moment that would change everything. Around 2 o'clock, the elevator doors opened, and a distinguished-looking man in his mid-60s stepped into the lobby. Tall, with salt and pepper hair and keen blue eyes, he carried himself with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to authority. Following protocol, I smiled professionally. "Good afternoon. Welcome to Rapid Tech Solutions. How may I help you?" The man stopped abruptly, staring at me with an expression of stunned recognition. Mabel Johnson. My maiden name, unused for nearly 4 decades, caught me completely off guard. I studied his face, searching for familiarity in his features. "It's David Richardson," he said, approaching the desk. "From Westlake University. We had advanced literature together senior year, 1983. The memories rushed back in a flood. David Richardson, the brilliant English major who'd sat beside me in Professor Harmon's class, who'd debated literary theory with passion, who'd asked me out 3 times before I met James. "David," I breathed, recognition dawning. I had no idea you were connected to Rapid Tech." He laughed, a warm, genuine sound that drew curious glances from passing employees. "Connected? I founded it 15 years ago. I'm the CEO." The CEO? My son's boss? The man Thomas had supposedly convinced to hire me as a favor. "What on earth are you doing at the reception desk, Mabel?" David asked, confusion evident in his expression. "Are you visiting someone?" Before I could formulate a response, Barbara from HR appeared at my side, alerted by the unusual scene of the CEO engaged in extended conversation with the new receptionist. "Mr. Richardson, welcome back from your overseas trip. I see you've met our new receptionist, Mrs. Walker." David's eyebrows rose. "Walker, you married then?" "Yes," I replied, feeling strangely flustered. "For 37 years, until my husband passed a decade ago." "I'm sorry to hear that," David said sincerely. Then turning to Barbara. "Mrs. Walker and I are old friends from university. We haven't seen each other in 40 years? 39? I corrected automatically, then felt my cheeks warm at the admission that I'd kept track. Barbara looked between us, clearly struggling to process this unexpected connection. "That's quite a coincidence." "Indeed it is." David agreed, his eyes never leaving my face. "Barbara, please clear my 3 o'clock. Mabel and I have some catching up to do." To me, he added, "Can someone cover the desk for an hour? I'd like to buy you a coffee." As Barbara hurried to make arrangements, I sat frozen, unsure how to proceed. What would Thomas say when he discovered his mother had a prior connection to the company's CEO? What exactly had Thomas told David about me? And most confusing of all, why did my heart suddenly feel like it was beating at double speed after all these years? "So, let me get this straight," David said, stirring his black coffee at the upscale cafe near the Rapid Tech building. "Thomas Walker, my director of product implementation, is your son, and he arranged for you to work as our receptionist." I nodded, still processing the incredible coincidence myself. "Yes, though I'm guessing he didn't mention our relationship to you directly." David leaned back in his chair, his expression a mix of amusement and disbelief. "No, he certainly didn't. Barbara handles front desk staffing. Thomas apparently told her he knew someone reliable who needed a position. She took his recommendation at face value." The elegant cafe was nearly empty in the mid-afternoon lull. Through the window, I could see the Rapid Tech building gleaming in the afternoon sun, 20 floors up to where someone, likely Susan, was covering the reception desk so I could have this surreal reunion. "I can't believe you're David Richardson of Rapid Tech Solutions," I said, shaking my head. "The last I heard, you were pursuing a doctorate in English literature." He laughed, the lines around his eyes crinkling in a way that was both new and familiar. "Life takes unexpected turns. I finished that doctorate that taught for a few years, then realized academic politics wasn't for me. I took some computer science courses out of curiosity, discovered I had an aptitude for it, and eventually started consulting for businesses on their knowledge management systems." "Quite a leap from analyzing Chaucer," I observed. "Not as different as you might think. Both involve understanding complex systems and finding patterns." His eyes held mine. "What about you? I always imagined you'd become a professor yourself, given your brilliant literary analyses." The compliment warmed me, reminding me of a younger self who'd once had such ambitions. "I became an elementary school teacher instead. 3rd grade. Just retired after 35 years." Teaching 8-year-olds instead of college students that requires even more skill and patience. His respect seemed genuine, unlike the dismissive attitude I'd encountered from others regarding my career. But why are you working as a receptionist post-retirement? Surely that wasn't your plan? The question touched a nerve, exposing vulnerabilities I wasn't sure I wanted to reveal. But something about David's direct gaze encouraged honesty. Financial necessity, I admitted. My teacher's pension isn't enough to cover rising housing costs, and I have limited savings. Thomas arranged this position when it became clear I needed additional income. David nodded, slowly processing this information. Thomas is one of our more ambitious executives. Competent, though sometimes lacking in people skills. He's never mentioned his family situation in the 3 years he's worked for us. We're not as close as we once were, I said, carefully, not wanting to speak ill of my son despite everything. People grow, priorities change. Indeed they do. David took a sip of his coffee, watching me thoughtfully. So tell me about the years in between. You married? James Walker. We met my senior year right after. I hesitated, not sure how to reference the fact that David had asked me out multiple times back then. Right after you turned me down for the 3rd time, he finished with a wry smile. No hard feelings. James was obviously the right choice for you. He was, I agreed softly. We had a good life together. Simple, but happy. He was an engineer, practical, honest, devoted to our son. He died of a heart attack 10 years ago. I'm truly sorry, Mabel. David's sympathy felt genuine. And you never remarried? I shook my head. Between teaching full-time and adjusting to widowhood, it never seemed a possibility. What about you? Did you find someone? A shadow crossed his face. I married Caroline right after graduate school. It lasted 15 years before we realized we'd become essentially strangers living in the same house. The divorce was amicable but sobering. There were a few relationships afterward, nothing permanent. Our conversation flowed easily from there, filling in the decades-long gap in our knowledge of each other's lives. David spoke of building Rapid Tech from a small consulting firm into a major software company, the challenges and rewards of entrepreneurship, his passion for creating a positive workplace culture. I shared stories of my teaching career, the thousands of children whose lives I'd touched, the joy of watching young minds develop and flourish. We discovered we'd both developed a love for hiking in midlife, both preferred classical music while working, both still read poetry for pleasure, habits neither of us had in our university days. The hour passed quickly, and I reluctantly glanced at my watch. I should get back to the desk. I don't want to impose on whoever's covering for me. David nodded, though he seemed equally reluctant to end our conversation. Of course. But Mabel, I have to ask, are you satisfied with the reception position? It seems like a poor use of your talents and experience. The question caught me off guard with its directness. I'm grateful for the opportunity, I replied diplomatically. At my age, with my limited technical background, I didn't expect many options. That's not what I asked, David said gently. Are you satisfied with it? I looked down at my half-empty teacup, considering how honest I should be. No, I finally admitted. It's not fulfilling work for me, but it serves a practical purpose, and at this point in my life, practicality has to take precedence over fulfillment. David was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. What if there were alternatives that could provide both? Before I could respond, he continued. Rapid Tech has been discussing the need for better training programs for our younger employees. They're technically brilliant, but often lack communication skills, professional etiquette, emotional intelligence, the human elements that make a workplace function smoothly. I nodded, having observed this firsthand during my brief time at the reception desk. We need someone with experience in education, someone who understands how people learn, and develop someone with patience and wisdom. His eyes met mine. Would a role developing and implementing such training programs interest you more than answering phones? My heart raced at the possibility. "Are you offering me a different position?" "I'm exploring the idea," he said carefully. "It would be a newly created role, training and development specialist perhaps. The salary would be significantly better than the reception position. But I want to be clear, this isn't charity, or simply because of our past connection. I believe your skills as an educator could bring real value to Rapid Tech." For the first time in months, I felt a spark of genuine excitement. I'd be very interested in discussing such a position further. "Good." David smiled, signaling for the check. "Let me talk with our executive team early next week. In the meantime, let's keep this conversation between us, including from Thomas." The mention of my son brought me back to reality. He'll be upset if he thinks I'm leveraging a personal connection to circumvent his arrangements. David's expression hardened slightly. "Nepotism works both ways, Mabel. If Thomas used his position to secure you a job, he's hardly in a position to complain if you find a better fit within the company." He paused. "Which brings me to a delicate question. Why did Thomas arrange for you to work as a receptionist specifically? Given your background, there seemed to be more suitable roles you could have considered." I hesitated, reluctant to reveal the full extent of Thomas's attitude toward me. But David's direct gaze once again encouraged honesty. "Thomas doesn't have a high opinion of my capabilities outside the classroom," I said carefully. "He sees me primarily as his aging mother who needs financial support but has limited value in a modern workplace." "I see." David's tone suggested he was reading between the lines. "And how did the subject of employment arise in the first place? Was it something you requested?" The cafe had emptied further, giving our conversation an intimacy that made it difficult to maintain pretenses. Taking a deep breath, I shared the truth I'd been too embarrassed to admit to anyone else. "When I told Thomas I needed to retire and was concerned about housing costs, he made it clear he didn't want me living with him and his wife. His exact words were, 'I don't want to feed an extra mouth.' The job was his solution to ensure I remained self-sufficient and not his responsibility." David's expression darkened. "That doesn't align with the family values Rapid Tech tries to promote. We offer generous family leave, flexible schedules for parents' eldercare benefits. We recognize that employees have responsibilities beyond the workplace." "Thomas has always been career-focused," I said, feeling a need to defend my son despite everything. "He and Natalie have certain lifestyle expectations that don't include accommodating a mother-in-law." "There's ambition, and then there's basic human decency," David replied, his tone gentle but firm. Speaking as someone who regrets not spending more time with my own parents before they passed, I find his attitude troubling. We walked back to the Rapid Tech building together, continuing our conversation about possible training initiatives I might develop. For the first time since retirement loomed, I felt a sense of purpose and possibility. As we entered the lobby, Susan looked up from the reception desk with poorly concealed curiosity. "Thank you for covering, Susan," I said gratefully. "No problem at all, Mabel. The phones have been quiet." Her eyes darted between David and me, clearly wondering about our connection. "Mrs. Walker and I are old university friends," David explained with a smile. "A remarkable coincidence to find her at our front desk." Susan's eyes widened. Wow, what are the odds?" "Indeed," David agreed. "Susan, you've been helping Mabel acclimate, haven't you? That's exactly the kind of mentorship we want to encourage company-wide." Susan beamed at the recognition from the CEO. "Happy to help. Mabel catches on quickly." As Susan gathered her things to return to her department, David turned to me. "I'll be in touch early next week about that other matter we discussed. In the meantime, keep up the good work at reception." With a warm smile that reminded me of our university days, he headed toward the executive elevator. I returned to my place behind the desk, my mind spinning with the afternoon's developments. By the time I logged out at 5 o'clock, I'd managed to process some of my conflicting emotions. Excitement about the potential new role warred with anxiety about Thomas's reaction. Hope for a more fulfilling job competed with caution about reading too much into David's interest in my situation. As I rode the bus home watching the city transition from business district to residential neighborhoods, I allowed myself to imagine a different future than the one I'd resigned myself to. Perhaps retirement didn't have to mean diminishment. Perhaps 62 wasn't too late for new beginnings. That weekend, I found myself researching corporate training methodologies and adult education techniques ideas, forming for how traditional teaching principles could be adapted for a business environment. For the first time since James died, I felt intellectually stimulated, engaged with possibilities rather than limitations. Monday morning, I returned to the reception desk with renewed energy, viewing it as a temporary station rather than a permanent demotion. The phone system seemed less intimidating, the visitor protocols more manageable. I even found myself observing the workplace dynamics with a teacher's analytical eye, identifying potential areas where training could improve communication and collaboration. At precisely 10 o'clock, my desk phone rang with an internal call. "Mrs. Walker," came Barbara's formal voice. "Mr. Richardson would like to see you in his office at 11. I'll arrange coverage for the desk." The wheels were in motion. Whatever David had in mind, I would soon find out if it offered the new beginning I'd suddenly begun to hope for. The executive floor of Rapid Tech Solutions felt like another world compared to the reception area. Sleek glass offices lined the perimeter, offering panoramic views of the city. Modern artwork adorned the walls, and comfortable seating areas created spaces for impromptu meetings. Even the air felt different, charged with importance and possibility. David's assistant, an efficient woman named Janet, greeted me warmly and ushered me into his corner office without delay. The space reflected its occupant, tastefully appointed but not ostentatious, with bookshelves holding an eclectic mix of technical manuals and literary classics. David rose from behind his desk when I entered, gesturing to a comfortable chair across from him, rather than the more formal seating arrangement by the window. "Mabel, thank you for coming up. I hope your morning at reception hasn't been too demanding." "It's been manageable," I replied, settling into the chair and trying to project a confidence I didn't entirely feel. The stakes of this meeting suddenly seemed very high. "Good." David sat back down, his expression shifting to one of businesslike focus. "I've spent the weekend thinking about our conversation and researching potential roles where your background in education could benefit Rapid Tech." He opened a folder containing what appeared to be a formal proposal. "I've spoken with our executive team about creating a new position, training and development coordinator. The role would involve developing programs to enhance soft skills among our technical staff, improving interdepartmental communication, and creating orientation materials for new employees." My heart quickened as he outlined responsibilities that sounded both challenging and aligned with my experience. This was no token position. It was substantive work that could genuinely utilize my teaching background. The salary would be $65,000 annually with standard benefits and flexible hours. He pushed the proposal toward me. "The team was quite receptive to the idea, particularly when I shared your background in education." I glanced at the salary figure, momentarily stunned. It was more than twice what the reception position paid, and significantly higher than my final teacher's salary after 35 years. "This is very generous," I managed, trying to collect my thoughts. "Did you mention our prior acquaintance or my relationship to Thomas?" David's expression remained professional. I disclosed our university connection in the interest of transparency, but emphasized that my recommendation was based on your qualifications. As for Thomas, I felt that was his information to share if he chooses. I nodded, grateful for his discretion. "May I ask what prompted such a specific proposal so quickly? Creating a new position usually involves more bureaucracy." A slight smile crossed his face. "One advantage of being the founder and CEO is the ability to expedite certain decisions when I see clear value. Our turnover rate among younger employees has been concerning for some time. Exit interviews consistently cite poor management communication and insufficient mentoring. Your expertise could address these issues directly. He leaned forward, his tone becoming more personal. But I'll be honest, Mabel. After learning how Thomas arranged your employment here, I was troubled. Placing a career educator with your experience at a reception desk seemed inappropriate. This proposal rights that wrong while genuinely benefiting the company. The sincerity in his voice was touching, but a lifetime of practical considerations made me cautious. And if I accept this position, how would that affect Thomas professionally? I don't want to create difficulties for him. Thomas's position is secure based on his own performance, David assured me. Though I will admit, learning how he regards family obligations has affected my personal assessment of his character. That's separate from his technical capabilities. I took a deep breath, considering the opportunity before me. It offered financial security, professional dignity, and the chance to make meaningful contributions, rather than simply answering phones. Yet I couldn't help worrying about Thomas's reaction. I would like to accept, I said finally. But I'd prefer to discuss it with Thomas first, rather than having him learn about it through company channels. David nodded. I respect that. Take the proposal home, review it thoroughly, and let me know your decision by Wednesday. If you accept, we could transition you from reception as early as next Monday. As I stood to leave proposal in hand, David added, Regardless of your decision, Mabel, it's been a genuine pleasure reconnecting with you after all these years. Sometimes, life presents unexpected second chances. The warmth in his eyes suggested he might be referring to more than just professional opportunities, but neither of us acknowledged it directly. Some possibilities needed time to unfold at their own pace. Back at the reception desk, I tucked the proposal into my bag, my mind racing with possibilities and concerns. How would Thomas react? Would other employees resent my sudden promotion? Could I truly succeed in such a different environment after decades in elementary education? The afternoon passed in a blur of routine tasks performed on autopilot, while my thoughts remained fixated on the life-changing opportunity I'd been offered. By the time I arrived home that evening, I had mentally composed and discarded a dozen ways to approach Thomas with the news. Finally, I simply texted him, Need to speak with you about a work matter. Can you stop by my apartment after work tomorrow? His reply came an hour later. Schedule tight this week. What's it about? Typical Thomas, always too busy for in-person conversations, unless they served his immediate purposes. I responded, Something important that needs to be discussed face-to-face. I wouldn't ask if it weren't necessary. And after a longer delay, Fine, 7 p.m. tomorrow. That night, I spread the proposal across my kitchen table, reading every detail carefully. The position description played to my strengths: curriculum development, instructional design, interpersonal communication. The compensation package would allow me to maintain my apartment and even build some savings. Most importantly, it offered purpose and respect, elements I'd feared were behind me after retirement. I allowed myself to imagine a new chapter, developing training programs, mentoring young professionals, contributing meaningfully to a dynamic company, and perhaps reconnecting with someone from my past who seemed to value what I had to offer. Thomas arrived precisely at 7 the following evening, his expression a mixture of impatience and curiosity. He declined my offer of dinner, but accepted a cup of coffee. What's this about mom problems at reception already? I took a steadying breath. Not exactly. Something unexpected has happened. I placed David's proposal on the coffee table between us. David Richardson, the CEO, recognized me last Friday. We knew each other in university before I met your father. Thomas's eyes widened, first in surprise, then narrowing with suspicion. You know David Richardson, personally? We were in several classes together senior year. We lost touch after graduation. I decided the details of David's unrequited interest weren't relevant to the current situation. He was quite surprised to find me working as a receptionist. Thomas picked up the proposal, scanning it with growing consternation. Training and Development Coordinator, $65,000. His voice rose with each question. What is this, Mom? It's an opportunity David has offered me, a position that actually utilizes my background in education. Thomas stood abruptly pacing my small living room. This is completely inappropriate. You can't leverage a decades-old connection to jump from receptionist to a made-up position in 1 week. The position addresses real needs within the company, I countered, keeping my voice steady. And as for leveraging connections, isn't that exactly what you did when you arranged the receptionist job for me? That was different, he snapped. I was helping you out of a difficult situation. By placing me in the lowest possible position regardless of my qualifications, I said quietly. Because you didn't want to feed an extra mouth. The direct reference to his cruel words stopped his pacing. For a moment, he looked almost ashamed before his expression hardened again. Do you have any idea how this makes me look? The receptionist my department hired suddenly getting promoted to a senior position because she knew the CEO in college, people will think I orchestrated it. Or they might not think about you at all, Thomas, I suggested gently. This isn't actually about you. His laugh was harsh. Everything at Rapid Tech affects my professional reputation. I've spent 3 years building credibility there, positioning myself for senior management. This undermines all of that. I stood as well, suddenly tired of prioritizing his concerns over my own. I spent 35 years in a classroom shaping young minds and building a career I was proud of. I raised you alone after your father died, sacrificing my financial security to put you through business school. And when I needed support, you saw me as a burden and found me a position answering phones despite my qualifications. Thomas flinched at the directness of my words. I'm 62 years old, I continued. I have maybe another decade of active working life. Is it so wrong for me to want that time to be meaningful, to use the skills I've spent a lifetime developing? Mom, he began, but I wasn't finished. You told me once that the receptionist position was a huge favor. Now I realize it wasn't a favor at all. It was a way to absolve yourself of responsibility while keeping me in what you considered my proper place. Grateful subordinate and out of your personal life. The silence that followed was heavy with truths we'd both avoided for too long. Finally, Thomas sank back onto the couch, his defensive posture deflating. It wasn't like that, he said, but his tone lacked conviction. Then what was it like? Thomas, help me understand. He stared at his hands, the corporate confidence replaced by something more vulnerable. After Dad died, you became so dependent, emotionally, financially. It scared me seeing you struggle. I think I've been running from that fear ever since, pushing you away to avoid feeling responsible. It was more insight than he'd shown in years, and it caught me off guard. I did struggle, I acknowledged. Losing your father was the hardest thing I'd ever experienced. But I never expected you to solve my problems. I just wanted to be treated with dignity. Natalie was part of it too, he admitted reluctantly. She comes from a family where appearances matter tremendously. The idea of her successful husband having a mother working as a receptionist was barely acceptable. Having you live with us was completely out of the question in her mind. I nodded, suspicions confirmed. I understand social pressures, Thomas. What I don't understand is why my own son would value those pressures above my well-being. He had no answer for that, and I didn't press further. We sat in silence for several minutes, years of unspoken tensions hanging between us. So what will you do? He finally asked, gesturing to the proposal still on the table. I'm going to accept the position, I said firmly. It's the right opportunity at the right time. I hope you can find a way to be happy for me, but I'll proceed regardless. Thomas nodded slowly. I don't really have a choice, do I? If I oppose it, I look petty. If I support it, I have to explain our connection to colleagues. You could simply tell the truth, I suggested. That I'm your mother, that David discovered my background in education and saw potential value for the company. There's no shame in that story. He didn't look convinced, but didn't argue further. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Mom, I am sorry for how I've treated you. I got so caught up in climbing the corporate ladder that I forgot some of the values Dad tried to teach me." It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a start. "Thank you for saying that, Thomas. It means a lot." After he left, I sat for a long time in my quiet apartment, reflecting on how dramatically my circumstances had changed in just a few days. From reluctant retiree to unwilling receptionist to training coordinator with a salary that would ensure my independence. And perhaps most surprisingly, reconnected with someone from my past who seemed to see value in me that my own son had overlooked. The next morning, I emailed David my acceptance of the position. His response came within minutes. "Excellent news. Looking forward to having your expertise on our team. Dinner this weekend to discuss transition details." As I typed my acceptance to the dinner invitation, I realized that the harsh words that had so wounded me, "I don't want to feed an extra mouth," had ultimately set in motion events that opened a door to unexpected possibilities. Sometimes our greatest hurts lead to our most significant opportunities for growth and change. The following Monday, I would begin my new role not as someone's mother or someone's charity case, but as a professional with valuable skills to contribute. And that, after all the uncertainty of recent months, felt like a gift I'd nearly forgotten to hope for. The transition from reception desk to training coordinator happened more quickly than I'd anticipated. By Thursday afternoon, Barbara from HR had processed the paperwork, and by Friday, I was clearing my few personal items from the reception area and moving into a small but private office on the 18th floor. Susan from marketing stopped by as I was packing up my desk. "So, the rumors are true," she said, with a mix of surprise and admiration. "You're moving up to create our training program, and after only 2 weeks, that must be some kind of company record." I smiled, still adjusting to the reality myself. "It's a bit of a special circumstance. The CEO and I knew each other years ago, and he felt my background in education could benefit the company." "Well, good for you," Susan said sincerely. "Most of the younger staff could use some serious help with communication skills. Yesterday, I got an email from a developer that was just a string of abbreviations and code references. Might as well have been written in ancient Sumerian." Her support warmed me especially, since not all reactions had been so positive. I'd noticed whispers and curious glances as news of my promotion spread through the office. A few people had been openly hostile, particularly Janice, who had trained me at reception and now seemed to view my advancement as a personal affront. "Some people luck into the right connections," I'd overheard her muttering to a colleague in the break room. "Must be nice to skip the normal career ladder." Such comments stung, but I reminded myself that I'd earned this opportunity through decades of developing the skills that now made me valuable to Rapid Tech. The circumstances of reconnecting with David might have been coincidental, but my qualifications were not. Thomas had maintained a careful distance since our conversation, acknowledging me professionally when our paths crossed, but avoiding personal interaction. Office gossip had quickly connected us as mother and son, adding another layer of speculation to my rapid promotion. Thomas neither confirmed nor denied our relationship to colleagues, creating an awkward ambiguity that I hoped would eventually resolve. My new office, though modest, symbolized a fresh start. The weekend before officially beginning my new role, I spent hours organizing the space and preparing for the challenges ahead. I created an outline for a comprehensive training program drawing on educational methodologies I'd refined over decades, but adapting them for adult professionals. David had been supportive throughout the transition, checking in daily with brief encouraging emails. Our planned dinner to discuss details had evolved into a regular Saturday meeting at a quiet restaurant away from the office where we could speak freely about both professional and personal matters. "The technical staff are brilliant, but often lack emotional intelligence," David explained during our first dinner. "They can write complex algorithms but struggle to explain their ideas to non-technical colleagues. That's where your expertise comes in." "I've noticed that disconnect already," I agreed. In education, we emphasize that different learning styles require different communication approaches. The same principle applies in workplace collaboration. As we shared ideas and experiences, our conversation naturally drifted to more personal topics. David spoke of his post-divorce years focused entirely on building Rapid Tech, the satisfaction of creating a successful company tempered by the loneliness of having no one to share it with. Work filled the void for a long time, he admitted. But lately, I've been thinking about balance, about what comes next. I'm 65. Retirement is on the horizon, theoretically at least. Do you think you'll actually retire? I asked, curious about his vision for the future. He smiled thoughtfully. Step back, certainly. But retire completely, I'm not sure I'm built for golf and cruises. I'd like to remain involved in mentoring the next generation of leadership, perhaps dedicate more time to our foundation work. The Rapid Tech Foundation funded technology education in underserved communities, a passion project David had started 5 years earlier. His eyes lit up when describing the programs they'd established in inner-city schools and rural areas. It's about creating access and opportunity, he explained. Technology shapes our world, but too many talented young people never get the chance to participate in its development because they lack resources or exposure. His commitment to education created yet another point of connection between us, a shared value that transcended our different career paths. As we continued meeting weekly, I found myself looking forward to our conversations with an anticipation I hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, my new role presented both challenges and rewards. My first task was conducting a needs assessment across departments, interviewing team leaders, and observing workplace interactions to identify the most critical training priorities. The technical departments, populated primarily by younger employees with advanced degrees in computer science or engineering, initially viewed my presence with skepticism. "Why do we need soft skills training when our code works?" asked one particularly blunt developer during an assessment meeting. "Because your brilliant code is worthless if no one understands how to implement it," I replied calmly. Communication isn't an optional skill. It's the foundation that makes all your other skills valuable to the organization. My directness, honed by years of managing classrooms full of 8-year-olds, seemed to earn their respect more quickly than a gentler approach might have. By the end of my 3rd week, I'd compiled enough data to design targeted training modules for different departments. The marketing team needed help with technical comprehension to better represent the products they promoted. The developers needed communication skills to explain their work to non-technical colleagues. Middle managers like Thomas needed coaching in effective feedback and team building, and everyone could benefit from improved conflict resolution strategies. I presented my findings and proposed curriculum to David and the executive team with the confidence of someone who had spent decades designing educational programs. The positive response was validating after years of having my professional expertise dismissed as just teaching kids. "This is exactly what Rapid Tech needs," the chief operating officer commented after my presentation. "Someone who understands how people learn and communicate, not just another consultant with generic corporate training materials." As I left the boardroom, I caught Thomas watching me from across the hall, his expression unreadable. We hadn't spoken privately since our confrontation in my apartment, and the strain was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. That afternoon, I made a decision to address it directly, sending him a meeting request for the following day. He accepted without comment, and at the appointed time appeared at my office door with a carefully neutral expression. "You wanted to see me?" he asked formally, as if we were merely colleagues. "Please come in and close the door, Thomas," I replied, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. Once he was seated, I continued, "This situation is becoming untenable. We can't continue avoiding each other indefinitely." He sighed, some of the professional facade dropping away. "What do you want from me, Mom? I'm trying to process everything that's happened. 2 months ago, you were retiring from teaching. Now you're a department head at my company with a direct line to the CEO. It's a lot to adjust to." "I understand that," I acknowledged. "But this awkward distance is being noticed. People are starting to ask questions about our relationship." Let them ask, he said dismissively. Office gossip is inevitable. This isn't about gossip. It's about our family relationship, which shouldn't be collateral damage in a professional situation. I softened my tone. Thomas, I never intended to complicate your work life. The opportunity with David arose unexpectedly, but it's a genuine chance for me to use my skills and secure my future. While making me look like I either nepotistically arranged your promotion or callously relegated my mother to a reception desk, he countered bitterly. Either way, my professional reputation suffers. His persistent self-focus finally pushed me past patience. Is that all you care about, your professional reputation? Not the fact that your mother is finally being valued for her expertise after you dismissed her as an extra mouth to feed? The direct reference to his cruel words hit home. For a moment, Thomas looked genuinely ashamed. I never should have said that, he admitted quietly. It was callous and untrue. I was stressed about money. Natalie and I overextended on the house and her spending habits. He trailed off, shaking his head. But that's no excuse. You deserved better from me. The unexpected apology caught me off guard. For years, Thomas had maintained a carefully controlled image, rarely showing vulnerability or admitting mistakes. Thank you for saying that, I said sincerely. It means a great deal to me. He nodded, still avoiding my eyes. When Dad died, everything changed. You became more emotionally dependent, and I wasn't prepared for that role reversal. Instead of handling it maturely, I started pulling away, focusing entirely on my career and letting Natalie's values influence me more than they should have. We both struggled after losing James, I acknowledged. Grief affects people differently. I should have recognized that you needed space rather than increased closeness. A tentative understanding began forming between us, bridging the chasm that had widened over years of unspoken resentments and misaligned expectations. So, where do we go from here? Thomas asked pragmatically. Forward, I hope, I replied. We can be professional at work and rebuild our personal relationship gradually. I'm not asking for daily family dinners or dramatic reconciliations, just mutual respect and open communication. Thomas seemed to consider this reasonable request. I can do that, he agreed finally. And for what it's worth, your training proposal actually impressed me. I wouldn't have thought elementary education principles could translate to corporate environments, but your presentation made a compelling case. Coming from Thomas, this professional acknowledgement felt significant, perhaps more meaningful than a purely personal reconciliation would have been. As he rose to leave, Thomas hesitated at the door. Natalie's planning a dinner party next weekend for some of my colleagues. Would you like to come? As family, not as a coworker. The invitation represented a small but meaningful step toward healing our relationship. I'd like that very much, I replied warmly. The following weeks brought a gradual normalization of our workplace interactions. Thomas began acknowledging our relationship openly, with colleagues framing it factually without embarrassment or excessive explanation. Yes, Mabel is my mother. She spent 35 years in education before bringing those skills to Rapid Tech. Meanwhile, my training program was taking shape. I conducted pilot sessions with volunteer departments, refining my approach based on feedback. To my surprise, some of the most enthusiastic participants came from the technical teams initially most resistant to soft skills training. I never realized how much miscommunication was happening because we used different terminology, commented one senior developer after a cross-departmental workshop. This actually makes my job easier. My professional confidence, dormant since retirement, bloomed fully in this new environment. I found myself drawing on teaching methodologies I'd developed over decades while embracing new challenges specific to adult education in a corporate setting. The work was different, yet familiar, demanding, yet deeply satisfying. Throughout this transition, David remained a steadfast supporter, offering guidance when needed, but trusting my expertise to shape the program. Our weekend dinners continued evolving from professional discussions to increasingly personal conversations about our pasts, our values, and gradually our possible futures. "I've been thinking about our university days," David said during one such dinner about 2 months into my new role. "Do you remember Professor Harmon's question about the road not taken? He asked us to consider how our lives might have unfolded if we'd made different choices at crucial moments." I nodded, the memory surfacing clearly. He was referencing Frost's poem. "You wrote that brilliant essay arguing that the concept of alternate paths was an illusion because we can only truly know the person we've become through the choices we actually made." David looked pleased that I remembered. Yet here we are, decades later, unexpectedly reconnected. It makes me wonder about those alternate paths after all. The implication hung between us unspoken but clear. If I had accepted his invitation all those years ago, instead of choosing James, how different might both our lives have been? "I believe we lived the lives we were meant to live," I said carefully. "I had a wonderful marriage with James and raised an amazing son despite our current complications. You built an incredible company that employs hundreds of people and makes a real difference in the world." "All true," he agreed. "And yet life sometimes offers second chances, doesn't it? Opportunities to explore paths that were previously closed to us." His gaze held mine across the table, the question in his eyes unmistakable. At 62, I found myself facing a possibility I'd never anticipated. A new beginning, not just professionally, but personally as well. "Second chances are precious," I acknowledged softly. "And perhaps all the more meaningful because we bring to them the wisdom accumulated along our first paths." It wasn't a declaration or a commitment, but rather an opening, an acknowledgement that possibilities existed that neither of us had foreseen when I